My name is Madison Harper, and at 29, I thought I'd found my happily ever after with tech executive Ryan Mitchell until his billionaire family called a family meeting to discuss my financial inadequacy. What they didn't know was that outside, my private helicopter was about to land on their perfectly manicured tennis court. And this is the story of how I went from being called trailer trash to watching the most powerful family in Silicon Valley's jaws hit the floor. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from, and thanks for being here. I grew up in Salem, Oregon, where my dad Mike worked as a mechanic at the local garage, and my mom Sarah pulled night shifts as an ICU nurse at the regional hospital. We weren't poor, but we definitely weren't rich. Every meal was planned around grocery store sales, and my clothes came from Target clearance racks. Our Friday night entertainment was renting a movie from Blockbuster and sharing a large pizza that had to last for Saturday lunch too. My parents taught me that hard work and education were the only ways to build a better life, and I took that lesson to heart. I spent my high school years buried in textbooks, pulling straight A's while working part-time at the local library to save money for college. When I got a full academic scholarship to Stanford, my parents cried at the kitchen table. It was the first time I'd ever seen my dad tear up. What none of us knew was that my great-grandmother, Eleanor Harper, had been quietly buying up real estate in Portland since the 1970s. Great-grandma Eleanor was this tiny, fierce woman who grew up during the Great Depression in rural Oklahoma and never forgot what it felt like to have nothing. She moved to Oregon as a young woman, worked as a seamstress during the day, and cleaned office buildings at night, saving every penny she could while learning about real estate from library books and newspaper articles. She had this incredible instinct for spotting neighborhoods that were about to boom, and she'd scrape together every penny to buy small properties that everyone else overlooked. While other people saw rundown areas with potential problems, she saw opportunity and investment potential that others missed. I was her favorite great-grandchild, maybe because I was the only one who bothered spending time with her, listening to her stories about surviving the Depression and building something from nothing. Every Sunday after church, I'd spend hours at her little house, helping her tend to her vegetable garden while she told me stories about perseverance and smart financial planning. She'd talk about the importance of patience, of seeing beyond what things looked like on the surface. Madison, she'd say in her soft Oklahoma accent, carefully pulling weeds from around her tomato plants. People see old women in old clothes, think Eleanor has nothing. But I know money is freedom. Real freedom. You save, you invest, you wait. Then you choose your life instead of life choosing you. She'd always end these conversations the same way, gripping my hand with her small, work-worn fingers. But never let money make you forget who you are. Money should make you more yourself, not a different person entirely. When great-grandma Eleanor passed away during my senior year at Stanford, I was devastated. I'd been living on ramen noodles and determination, working 3 part-time jobs, tutoring coding, campus IT support, and weekend shifts at a local coffee shop, just to cover my living expenses while maintaining my GPA. I felt guilty for not visiting her more during those final months, too caught up in my own struggle to realize how much time we had left. The funeral was small, held at the Methodist Church, where she'd attended services for 40 years. I was surprised by how many people came. Tenants from her properties, fellow members of her investment club, business associates I'd never heard of. After the service, her lawyer, an elderly man named Mr. Thompson, asked me to stay behind. "Your great-grandmother was very proud of you," he said, setting a thick folder on the table between us. "She wanted to make sure you had the choices she never had when she was young." That's when he read her will. $12 million. $12 million. I literally laughed out loud, thinking there was some kind of mistake. This was the woman who saved aluminum foil and darned holes in her socks. But as Mr. Thompson walked me through her portfolio, the reality began to sink in. Over 30 years, great-grandma Eleanor had been quietly building a real estate empire, buying properties in Portland neighborhoods before they gentrified, holding onto them as their values skyrocketed, reinvesting the profits into bigger and better properties. She'd been watching the city grow and change, predicting which areas would transform long before the urban planners figured it out. That questionable apartment building she'd bought in what became the Pearl District in 1985. now worth $4 million, the row of small houses in what became a trendy arts district. Another $3 million, property after property, each one purchased with cash, each one carefully maintained and strategically held. The folder contained property deeds, bank statements, investment accounts, rental income records, a paper trail of patient, brilliant financial planning that had transformed a Depression-era seamstress into a multi-millionaire real estate mogul. "She left everything to you, Mr. Thompson said, with one condition. You must promise to use it wisely and never let it change who you are at your core." I sat in that church basement, surrounded by the smell of coffee and old hymn books, holding financial documents that represented more money than I'd ever imagined possessing. My first instinct was to call my parents, but something stopped me. Great-Grandma Eleanor had kept this secret for 3 decades. There had to be a reason. I invested most of it immediately, working with a financial advisor to diversify into stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, while keeping the real estate portfolio intact. I used only what I needed to start my own company after graduation, founding Medicore AI when I was 25 with a clear mission: developing diagnostic assistance software that could help doctors in underserved communities access the same analytical tools as major hospitals. The technology was complex, using machine learning algorithms to analyze medical imaging, lab results, and patient symptoms to suggest potential diagnoses and treatment paths. But the concept was simple: democratize access to advanced medical analysis, so that a rural clinic in Oregon could provide the same quality of diagnostic support as Massachusetts General Hospital. Within 4 years, my company was valued at $15 million, with diagnostic software being piloted in 3 major hospital systems and interest from healthcare organizations across the country. Combined with my investments and real estate holdings, my total net worth had grown to around $25 million. But here's the thing: nobody knew. I still lived in a modest 1-bedroom apartment in Palo Alto, drove my 5-year-old Prius that I'd bought used, and shopped at thrift stores and Target. Not because I was cheap, but because I remembered Great-Grandma Eleanor's warning about money changing you. I wanted to be successful because of my work, my character, my contributions to the world, not because people saw dollar signs when they looked at me. I'd watched too many of my Stanford classmates change when money entered the picture, becoming calculating about friendships and relationships, constantly wondering if people liked them for themselves or their bank accounts. I didn't want that. I wanted authentic connections based on mutual respect and shared values, not financial compatibility. That philosophy was about to be tested in ways I never imagined. I met Ryan Mitchell 2 years ago at the AI Ethics Symposium at Stanford. I'd almost skipped the event. It was a Friday afternoon. I was exhausted from a week of debugging code, and I figured it would be another panel of tech bros talking about disruption without understanding the real-world implications of their products. But something about the speaker lineup caught my attention. Ryan Mitchell, VP of Innovation at Mitchell Enterprises, was giving a presentation called Responsible AI in Healthcare. I'd heard of Mitchell Enterprises. Their semiconductor chips powered half the medical devices in American hospitals. But I was skeptical that anyone from a major corporation would have anything meaningful to say about ethics. I was wrong. Ryan's presentation was thoughtful, nuanced, and demonstrated a deep understanding of the responsibility that comes with developing technology that could literally save or cost lives. He talked about bias in medical algorithms, the importance of diverse data sets, the need for transparency in AI decision-making processes. He asked hard questions about corporate responsibility and didn't offer easy answers. After his presentation, I approached him with what I thought was a quick question about algorithmic bias in diagnostic tools. 3 hours later, we were still standing in that conference room, having the most intellectually stimulating conversation I'd had in years. He challenged my assumptions about regulatory oversight. I challenged his ideas about open source versus proprietary medical software, and we both walked away with new perspectives and, honestly, a serious attraction to each other. Ryan was different from what I expected from a Silicon Valley executive. Yes, he was successful. VP of Innovation at his family's tech conglomerate was no small achievement. But he worked 60-hour weeks, lived in a nice but not ostentatious apartment near campus, and seemed genuinely passionate about using technology to solve real problems rather than just generating profits. When he asked for my number, he did it by handing me his business card and saying, "I'd love to continue this conversation over coffee sometime. I have a feeling we're just getting started." Our first date was hiking in the Santa Cruz Mountains. He picked me up in a well-maintained but definitely not flashy Honda Accord, packed sandwiches he'd made himself, and actually knew the names of the birds we encountered on the trail. We talked about everything from AI ethics to our favorite documentaries to our shared obsession with rock climbing. What struck me most was how normal he seemed. Yes, he was clearly educated and successful, but he didn't name-drop or flaunt his connections. He asked genuine questions about my work, listened to my answers, and shared his own challenges and frustrations with corporate bureaucracy. When he dropped me off at my apartment, he didn't even try to kiss me, just said he'd love to continue our conversation over dinner sometime. For the next 6 months, we were inseparable. Weekend hiking trips where we'd debate the future of artificial intelligence while watching sunset from mountain peaks. Cooking disasters in my tiny kitchen where we'd laugh until our sides hurt while ordering pizza to replace whatever we'd burned. Long conversations about books and movies and ideas that sometimes lasted until sunrise, both of us showing up to work the next day exhausted but energized. Ryan never flaunted his wealth, and I never revealed mine. We split dinner bills, took turns planning inexpensive dates, and seemed to operate on the same wavelength about what mattered in life. The intellectual and emotional connection we were building felt more important than any material considerations. Ryan talked about his family occasionally, always with a mix of love and slight exasperation that I found endearing. His father, Robert Mitchell, had founded Chiptech Industries in the 1980s, starting with a small semiconductor operation that had grown into an empire worth over $2 billion. His mother, Patricia, was a former Miss California who'd gotten her MBA from Stanford and now chaired half the charity boards in the Bay Area. His older brother, Jonathan, was being groomed to take over the family business, having married the daughter of a California senator in what Patricia called a perfect union of families with shared values and complementary social positions. Ryan described family dinners as elaborate affairs where business and social strategy were discussed with equal intensity. "They mean well," he'd say, when telling me stories about his mother's attempts to set him up with daughters of family friends or his father's lectures about strategic relationship building. "But sometimes I feel like they see my personal life as another business division that needs to be optimized." When Ryan finally took me home to meet his parents after 8 months together, I should have paid more attention to that phrase about strategic relationship building. The Mitchell family estate in Atherton was honestly breathtaking in its scope and grandeur. 15 acres of perfectly manicured grounds that looked like something from a luxury resort, approached through electronic gates that probably cost more than most people's cars. The main house was a 12-bedroom mansion that managed to be both imposing and elegant, with architecture that suggested old money, even though the family's wealth was relatively recent. As we drove up the circular driveway, past manicured gardens and a fountain that belonged in a European palace, I felt my first real flutter of anxiety about the wealth disparity between our families. My parents' entire house could have fit in their garage. "Don't be nervous," Ryan said, squeezing my hand as we parked. "They're going to love you." Robert Mitchell was exactly what you'd imagine a tech billionaire patriarch to look like. Silver hair styled by someone who charged more per haircut than I spent on groceries in a month, custom suits that fit like they'd been sewn directly onto his body, and the kind of handshake that was clearly designed to establish dominance from the first moment of contact. Patricia was elegant in that way that only comes from having unlimited resources and unlimited time to perfect your appearance. Her hair was salon perfect, her makeup was subtle but flawless, and her jewelry was understated in the way that only truly expensive pieces can be. She was perfectly polite, offering air kisses and compliments about my dress, but her eyes assessed me like I was a business proposal. She was trying to decide whether to fund. "Madison, how lovely to finally meet you," Patricia said, leading us into a living room that could have housed my entire apartment. "Ryan's told us so much about your little software company. Educational technology, isn't it? How admirable that you're trying to make technology more accessible." The word little hung in the air like a perfectly aimed dart, not malicious enough to be called an insult, but pointed enough to establish hierarchy. Dinner was served in a dining room that could have seated 30 people, though it was just the four of us at one end of a table that probably cost more than a luxury car. The conversation felt like an interrogation disguised as small talk, with each question designed to establish my place in their social and economic hierarchy. Robert asked about my parents' impressions of Silicon Valley salaries and whether my startup struggled to compete with enterprise clients in your market segment. Patricia wanted to know about my educational background, specifically how generous Stanford's financial aid had been, and whether I'd managed to graduate without too much debt burden. Every question had an underlying assumption that I was financially struggling, educationally disadvantaged, or socially climbing. They weren't trying to get to know me as a person. They were conducting due diligence on their son's romantic investment. Oregon is lovely, Patricia said over the soup course, delicately spooning what was probably a $100 bowl of bisque, though rather rustic compared to what Ryan's accustomed to here in California. The cultural opportunities must be quite limited. Small businesses like yours must really struggle with the enterprise market, Robert added, cutting his perfectly prepared filet mignon. The big players tend to dominate that space, especially in medical technology. It's quite challenging for newcomers to gain traction. I responded as professionally as I could, deflecting personal financial questions while highlighting Medicore AI's achievements, our pilot programs, our partnership discussions, the positive outcomes we were seeing in rural healthcare settings. But every answer seemed to confirm their preconceptions rather than challenge them. When I mentioned that our diagnostic software was being tested at 3 major hospital systems, Patricia smiled indulgently. How nice that they're willing to give small companies opportunities like that. It must be quite an honor for you. The implication was clear. I was a charity case being thrown scraps by benevolent institutions, not a serious entrepreneur building something valuable. By the end of the evening, I felt like I'd been through a psychological evaluation that I'd definitely failed. Not because of anything I'd said or done wrong, but simply because of who I was perceived to be. Ryan seemed oblivious to the subtle condescension. Or maybe he was just so used to his parents' behavior that he didn't recognize it anymore. On the drive back to my apartment, he was cheerful and optimistic. "That went great," he said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "They really liked you. Dad was impressed with your business model, and Mom thought you were charming." I wanted to believe him, but something in my gut told me that Robert and Patricia Mitchell had made their assessment of Madison Harper, and it wasn't favorable. I was the scholarship girl from Oregon who'd gotten lucky enough to catch their son's attention, and they were already planning how to manage this unfortunate situation. Over the next year, that assessment became increasingly clear through 1,000 small cuts disguised as polite conversation. Ryan and I grew closer, talking seriously about marriage and building a life together, but every interaction with his family felt like another small test that I was failing simply by existing in their orbit. Christmas at the family compound was particularly brutal. The entire extended family gathered for what Patricia called our annual celebration of gratitude and togetherness. About 30 people total, including aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends who'd achieved some level of social or financial prominence that qualified them for inclusion. I wore a beautiful dress from Target. It was navy blue with elegant lines, and I looked good in it. But I might as well have shown up in a potato sack compared to the designer gowns everyone else was wearing. Patricia's gift suggestions for our hypothetical wedding registry included helpful comments like, "Maybe you could register somewhere accessible, like Target or Bed Bath & Beyond." Nothing wrong with practical choices. The family business discussions always excluded me entirely, despite the fact that I was running my own successful tech company. Whenever conversation turned to chip tech industries, investment strategies, or market analysis, I suddenly became invisible. If I tried to contribute insights from my own business experience, and I had plenty of relevant experience, I was met with polite smiles and immediate subject changes. "You wouldn't understand the complexities, dear," Patricia would say with practiced sweetness. Enterprise technology is so different from consumer education apps. The scale and stakeholder management are completely different worlds. Except Medicore AI wasn't a consumer education app. It was sophisticated diagnostic software being piloted by major hospital systems, with regulatory compliance requirements that made most enterprise software look simple. But correcting these misconceptions felt like swimming upstream against a current of willful ignorance. Robert's approach was more direct but equally dismissive. He'd talk about real business challenges like regulatory compliance, investor relations, and enterprise sales cycles, always with the implication that my little startup couldn't possibly face such sophisticated problems. Madison's doing well with her niche market, he'd say when introducing me to his business associates. Educational technology for underserved communities. Very noble work, though not particularly scalable. The worst part was watching Ryan navigate these situations. Sometimes he'd defend me, pushing back when his mother's comments crossed obvious lines, or including me in conversations when his father tried to exclude me. But other times, he'd stay silent, and I could see him calculating whether standing up for me was worth the family drama it would cause. After 18 months together, Ryan started talking seriously about proposing. He was ready to take the next step, and honestly, so was I. Despite the family complications, I loved him deeply. He was brilliant, kind, hardworking, and had a moral compass that pointed true north, even when it would have been easier to compromise his principles. But the family pressure was intensifying as our relationship became more serious. Patricia made increasingly frequent comments about suitable matches and family compatibility. She'd mentioned daughters of family friends who were accomplished in their own right and came from families with shared values and similar backgrounds. Robert began asking pointed questions about my long-term financial planning and whether I understood the responsibilities and expectations that come with the Mitchell name. He'd frame these conversations as helpful guidance, but the underlying message was clear. I needed to prove my worthiness to join their family legacy. The breaking point came on a Sunday in March. Ryan had been acting strange all week, distracted, tense, having hushed phone conversations that he'd end abruptly when I entered the room. His usual confidence was replaced by an anxiety that was completely unlike him. Finally, on Friday night over dinner at our favorite Thai restaurant, he told me his father had called a family meeting for Sunday afternoon to discuss important family business matters that would affect everyone's future. "Do you want me to come?" I asked, though something in his expression made me suspect I already knew the answer. "Actually," Ryan said, not meeting my eyes while he pushed pad thai around his plate, "Dad specifically requested that it be family only, but he wants to meet with you afterward to discuss some things." Every alarm bell in my head started ringing. "What kind of things?" "I don't know exactly," Ryan said, but his tone suggested he knew more than he was saying. "Probably just family business stuff, making sure everyone's on the same page about the future." That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the careful phrasing, family only, followed by wanting to meet with me afterward. Like I was an outsider who needed to be managed rather than someone who might soon become part of their family. Sunday afternoon, I drove to the Mitchell estate with a sick feeling in my stomach that had nothing to do with the winding roads through the hills of Atherton. Ryan met me at the door, his face pale and his usual confidence nowhere to be seen. "How did the family meeting go?" I asked, studying his expression for clues. "We need to talk," he said, leading me not to the comfortable living room where we usually sat, but to the formal boardroom where Robert conducted business meetings. The entire family was there, arranged around the polished mahogany table like a corporate tribunal. Robert sat at the head, his expensive suit and stern expression making him look like a CEO about to deliver bad quarterly results. Patricia was to his right, perfectly composed but with steel in her eyes. Jonathan and his wife Melissa flanked them like a perfectly dressed support team, their expressions neutral but watchful. The family portraits on the walls seemed to be staring down at me with the same disapproving expressions as their living descendants. Generations of successful Mitchell men who'd built empires and expected their heirs to maintain the family legacy. "Madison," Robert began without preamble, gesturing to the chair Ryan pulled out for me. "Please have a seat. We need to discuss Ryan's future and certain complications that have arisen." I sat in the designated chair, my hands folded carefully in my lap to hide how much they were shaking. The formal setting, the serious expressions, the careful word choice, everything suggested this was going to be much worse than I'd imagined. "As you know," Patricia continued, her voice carrying the polished authority of someone accustomed to having her words treated as law, "Ryan is being considered for significant responsibilities within the family business. These opportunities come with certain expectations about his personal life, and the image he presents to our business partners, investors, and social circle. Jonathan leaned forward, his expression businesslike, but not unkind. The optics alone of Ryan's current relationship situation are becoming problematic. My colleagues in venture capital have started asking uncomfortable questions about family judgment and decision-making. What kind of questions? I asked, though I was pretty sure I didn't want to hear the answer. Melissa, who had barely acknowledged my existence for over a year, except when forced to by social convention, spoke up with practiced diplomatic precision. The wives in my charity circle are beginning to wonder about Ryan's judgment and what it says about the family's values. A scholarship girl from Oregon whose parents work blue-collar jobs. It's just not the image we need to project for the organizations we support and the causes we champion. The words hit like physical blows. Scholarship girl, blue-collar, not the image we need to project. Each phrase was carefully chosen to remind me of my place in their hierarchy. Furthermore, Robert continued, consulting a folder that had been sitting in front of him. We've done some research into your business situation. Educational software is a niche market with limited growth potential and significant regulatory challenges. You're hardly positioned to contribute meaningfully to the family's financial standing or business network. The casual mention of research into my business sent a chill down my spine. They'd been investigating me like I was a potential security threat rather than someone their son loved. We're sure you're a lovely person, Patricia added with the kind of fake sweetness that made my teeth ache. But you have to understand our position. The Mitchell family has certain standards to maintain, certain expectations to uphold. These aren't personal preferences. They're business necessities. The room fell silent except for the ticking of an antique clock on the mantel and the distant sound of gardeners working on the estate grounds. I looked around the table at these people, who had just casually dissected my worth as a human being and found me lacking. What exactly are you asking me to do? I asked, though I was beginning to understand exactly where this conversation was headed. Robert didn't blink or soften his expression. We're asking you to end your relationship with Ryan, cleanly, quietly, and immediately. We're prepared to make this transition easier for you financially. A generous settlement that would allow you to expand your business or pursue other opportunities. The implication was clear. They were offering to pay me to disappear from their son's life. And if I refuse, I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Then Ryan will be removed from succession planning for the family business, Robert said, with the cold precision of someone delivering a corporate restructuring plan. His trust fund will be frozen. His position at Mitchell Enterprises will be terminated, and he'll be cut off from the family entirely. Is your little romance really worth destroying his future and everything he's worked for? I looked at Ryan, who was staring at his hands folded on the table, his knuckles white with tension. This was the moment I needed him to stand up, to tell his family that they were wrong, that what we had was worth fighting for, that love mattered more than their social calculations. Instead, he looked up at me with anguish in his eyes and said, Maybe we should think about what's best for everyone. This is bigger than just us, Madison. It's about family legacy and responsibilities that go back generations. The betrayal hit harder than anything his family had said. Ryan, the man I'd planned to marry, the person I'd trusted with my heart, was actually considering this. He was weighing our love against his family's approval and finding our relationship wanting. You want me to walk away, I said quietly, because I'm not good enough for your family. That's not what anyone is saying, Patricia protested with practiced diplomacy. We're simply being practical about social compatibility and financial. No, I interrupted, standing up so quickly that my chair rolled backward. You're being practical about the fact that you think I'm poor trailer trash, who got lucky enough to catch Ryan's attention, and now you want to put me back in my place before I embarrass your precious family name. The silence that followed was deafening. I'd finally said what everyone was thinking, but no one wanted to acknowledge directly. Well, Robert said finally, his tone suggesting that my outburst had only confirmed his assessment of my character. I'm glad we understand each other clearly. I looked around the room one more time at these people who had just casually destroyed my relationship and crushed my heart like it was a minor business transaction requiring efficient resolution. Then I looked at Ryan, who still couldn't meet my eyes. I need some air, I said, and walked out of the room with as much dignity as I could manage. I made it to my car before the tears started. Sitting in the circular driveway of their estate, surrounded by more wealth than most people see in a lifetime. I cried for the man I'd lost and the family I'd never really had a chance to join. But somewhere between the parking lot and my apartment, something shifted inside me. The hurt started transforming into something else, something harder and more focused. I called my best friend Emma Rodriguez, who is now a corporate lawyer in New York. "They did what?" Emma's voice rose with indignation after I'd explained the whole situation. "Madison, tell me you're not actually considering this ridiculous ultimatum." "I don't know what choice I have," I said, curled up on my couch with a box of tissues and a pint of ice cream. "If I fight this, Ryan loses everything. If I don't, I lose him anyway." "You have choices they don't even know about," Emma said firmly. "When are you going to stop hiding who you really are?" She was right. For 2 years, I'd let the Mitchell family construct a completely false narrative about me. They saw me as a poor girl reaching above her station, when the reality was that I was a successful businesswoman who could buy and sell half their social circle without breaking a sweat. "I think it's time for a revelation," I said, feeling something click into place in my mind. "Now you're talking," Emma replied. "What do you need?" Over the next hour, I formulated a plan. It was dramatic, maybe a little petty, but it would certainly make my point in a way that the Mitchell family would never forget. First, I called my assistant, Caroline Kim, who was working late as usual. "Caroline, I need you to prepare a complete financial portfolio. Everything: bank statements, investment accounts, property holdings, company valuations, the full picture. Bind it professionally like we're presenting to major investors, and have it ready by tomorrow morning." "Of course," Caroline said without missing a beat. She'd been wondering when I'd finally decide to reveal my financial situation. Should I include the recent acquisition offers for Medicore AI? "Especially those," I confirmed. 3 different healthcare conglomerates had approached me in the past 6 months, with offers ranging from $35 to $45 million. I'd turned them all down because I wasn't ready to sell, but they certainly demonstrated the company's value and growth potential. Next, I called David Chung, my helicopter pilot. I'd hired David and purchased the helicopter 6 months earlier, when my business travel had become too frequent and unpredictable for commercial flights. David was a former military pilot with an excellent sense of humor and a flair for dramatic timing. "David, I need you tomorrow afternoon. We're making a statement." "Where are we going?" he asked, curiosity evident in his voice. "The Mitchell estate in Atherton. And David, make it dramatic. I want them to hear us coming from 3 miles away." I spent that evening transforming myself from the modest, understated woman the Mitchell family thought they knew into the successful CEO I actually was. Gone were the casual clothes and minimal makeup I'd maintained throughout my relationship with Ryan. I selected a $3,000 Armani power suit that I'd bought for a major investor meeting but never worn, charcoal gray with clean lines that projected authority and success. I paired it with $500 Louboutin heels that added 3 inches to my height and made a distinctive sound when I walked. The finishing touch was the $10,000 Cartier watch that had been a gift to myself when Medicore AI hit its first major milestone. Standing in front of my mirror, I barely recognized myself. This was Madison Harper, CEO and multimillionaire, not the modest scholarship girl the Mitchell family thought they could intimidate and dismiss. The next afternoon, I knew the Mitchell family would be having their traditional Sunday dinner. Extended family, important friends, business associates, all the people whose opinions Patricia valued most. It would be the perfect audience for what I had planned. My helicopter approached the estate from the south, flying low enough to be impossible to ignore, but high enough to be completely legal. David was a master of dramatic presentation, and he knew exactly how to make an entrance that would stop conversations and draw every eye in the house. The sound of the rotors echoed off the hills as we circled once, a perfectly legal flyover that happened to coincide with the Mitchell family's dinner hour. I could see people coming to windows, pointing and trying to figure out why a helicopter was circling their exclusive neighborhood. David settled the aircraft down on their tennis court with military precision, keeping the rotors spinning for maximum dramatic effect. The downdraft sent leaves and flower petals swirling across the manicured gardens like a tornado of expensive landscaping. I climbed out of the helicopter wearing my power suit and carrying a leather portfolio that contained enough financial documentation to rewrite the Mitchell family's understanding of who they were dealing with. My hair whipped dramatically in the rotor wash as I walked across the tennis court, through the garden, and straight to the French doors that opened onto the dining room. Through the glass, I could see 20-plus members of the Mitchell family and their friends staring at me in complete shock. Conversations had stopped mid-sentence. Wine glasses were frozen halfway to lips, and even the servers had paused to gape at the unexpected arrival. I opened the doors without knocking and stepped into the dining room. "Good evening," I said, my voice carrying clearly over the dying sound of helicopter blades. "I believe yesterday you called me poor." The silence in the room was absolute. Robert half rose from his chair at the head of the table, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Patricia's wine glass was frozen halfway to her lips, her perfect composure cracking for the first time since I'd known her. "Madison," Ryan said, standing up so quickly that his chair fell backward. Where did that helicopter come from?" "I thought it was time you met the real Madison Harper," I said, setting my leather portfolio on the table with a sound that echoed in the silent room. "Net worth, $25 million and growing." I opened the portfolio and began laying out documents with the systematic precision of a prosecutor presenting evidence. Bank statements showing investment accounts in the 8 figures, property deeds for my Portland real estate holdings, the most recent valuation of Medicor AI, letters from potential acquirers offering astronomical sums for my company. "This is my investment portfolio," I said, placing documents in front of Robert while maintaining eye contact. "Diversified holdings managed by Goldman Sachs, returning an average of 12% annually over the past 4 years." I moved to Patricia, setting down property records. "These are the acquisition offers I've received for my company in the past year. All declined because I wasn't ready to sell. The most recent offer was $45 million from a healthcare conglomerate you probably do business with." The room erupted in whispers and gasps. I could hear fragments of conversations as the extended family tried to process what they were seeing. $25 million? Did she say $25 million? Look at those bank statements. Those numbers can't be real. She turned down a $45 million offer. Where did all this money come from? Robert, to his credit, recovered his composure first. His business mind was already recalibrating, processing the implications of what I'd just revealed and trying to figure out how he'd so completely misjudged the situation. "This is unexpected," he said, scanning the financial documents with the intensity of someone reviewing a major acquisition. "These numbers are quite impressive." "What's unexpected," I said, turning to address the entire room, "is that you spent 2 years treating me like I was beneath your family without bothering to learn anything real about me or my accomplishments." I gestured to the documents spread across their dining table. "Yesterday, this family called me trailer trash. They said I was a gold digger, a social climber, a poor scholarship girl who wasn't suitable for their son. They demanded that I end my relationship with Ryan to protect the family's reputation and financial standing." The whispers had stopped. Everyone was hanging on every word, recognizing that they were witnessing something unprecedented in the carefully controlled world of the Mitchell family social circle. "The irony," I continued, "is that while you were worried about me damaging your family's financial standing, I was building a company that's revolutionizing diagnostic medicine and managing an investment portfolio that outperforms most of your hedge fund friends." Patricia finally found her voice, though it lacked its usual commanding authority. "Why didn't you tell us about your financial situation?" "Because I wanted to be loved for who I am, not what I have," I said, meeting her eyes directly. "I wanted to see if Ryan's family could accept a woman they believed to be from a modest background. I wanted to know if your son was choosing me for my character, my intelligence, my values, not my bank account." I paused, letting that sink in before delivering the final blow. "Clearly, the answer is no. You couldn't respect someone you thought was poor. You couldn't see value in a person whose parents work honest jobs. You couldn't imagine that a scholarship student might actually deserve to be in your social circle." Jonathan, who had been particularly vicious in yesterday's character assassination, was studying the company valuation documents with growing amazement. "Medicor AI, I've heard venture capital friends talking about this company. You're the founder who's been turning down acquisition offers." "I am." We're currently piloting our diagnostic software in hospital systems across 3 states, with expansion planned for next year. The technology could democratize access to advanced medical analysis for underserved communities worldwide. I turned back to Robert, who was still processing the financial implications. But this doesn't change anything about yesterday. You didn't reject me because you thought I was poor. You rejected me because you thought I was beneath you. The money doesn't magically make me a better person or change my character. It just reveals how shallow your judgment actually was. Robert was already shifting into deal-making mode, his business instincts overriding his social prejudices. This certainly changes the family dynamic significantly. We should discuss potential synergies with Chiptech's healthcare initiatives. No, I said firmly, closing the portfolio. This doesn't change anything about yesterday. You showed me exactly who you are when you thought I couldn't fight back. The money doesn't change your character, it just changes your calculations. The extended family members who had witnessed this entire exchange were clearly spreading the story through the room via whispered conversations and meaningful glances. I could see the social dynamics shifting in real time as people recalibrated their assessment of the situation. Cousin Margaret, who had barely spoken to me at Christmas, suddenly approached with a nervous smile. Madison, I had no idea about your business success. I've been looking for investment opportunities in healthcare technology. Uncle Charles, a prominent attorney who dismissed me as Ryan's little girlfriend, was now eyeing the acquisition letters with professional interest. $45 million for a 4-year-old company? That's remarkable growth in the healthcare AI sector. But I wasn't interested in their sudden change of heart. I was focused on Ryan, who was standing frozen beside his overturned chair, staring at me like he was seeing a completely different person. Ryan, I said, turning away from his relative's attempts to curry favor, I need to speak with you privately. We walked out to the garden, leaving the dining room buzzing with shocked conversation and frantic social recalculation. The helicopter was still waiting on the tennis court, David keeping the engines warm as instructed. Madison, Ryan said, reaching for my hands. I had no idea. Why didn't you tell me about any of this? Because it shouldn't matter, I said, allowing him to take my hands, but studying his face carefully. Yesterday, when your family was tearing me apart, you let them. You actually considered ending our relationship because they convinced you I wasn't good enough for the Mitchell family legacy. I was scared, he admitted, his voice barely audible over the distant sound of helicopter rotors. I've never stood up to them before. The family business, the trust fund, the expectations. It's all I've ever known. But seeing you now, seeing what you've accomplished without any of their help. So now I'm worthy of respect because I have money, I interrupted. Yesterday, I was a liability to your family's reputation. Today, I'm an asset worth cultivating. Do you understand how that makes me feel? That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant, I said, pulling my hands away. Yesterday, I was trailer trash reaching above my station. Today, I'm a valuable business connection. The only thing that changed was your knowledge of my bank account. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the manicured gardens that surrounded us. When he looked up, his eyes were full of tears. I failed you, he said quietly. When it mattered most, when you needed me to stand up for us, I failed you completely. I let them make you feel small, and I'll never forgive myself for that. It was the first honest thing he'd said since this whole ordeal began. I love you, Madison, he continued, not because of what you've built or what you're worth financially, but because you're brilliant and passionate, and you challenge me to be better than I am. But I understand if you can't forgive me for not seeing clearly when I needed to. I looked back at the house, where I could see the Mitchell family still clustered around the dining room table, probably dissecting every financial document I'd left behind, and trying to figure out how to salvage their relationship with someone they'd just discovered was wealthier than most of them. I need time, I said finally. This isn't just about money or business or social standing. It's about whether you can be the partner I need when things get difficult. It's about whether you'll choose us over their approval when it really matters. I understand, Ryan said. What can I do to prove that I can be that partner? Start by setting boundaries with your family. Real boundaries that aren't dependent on my net worth or their assessment of my value. Make it clear that your relationship with me is not up for family vote or business calculation. He nodded. I'll talk to them tonight. Don't talk to them for me, I said. Do it for yourself. Figure out what kind of man you want to be and what kind of life you want to build. Then we can see if those align with what I want." I turned toward the helicopter, then looked back one more time. "And Ryan, if you choose your family's approval over our relationship again, don't bother calling me. I won't be anyone's backup plan or consolation prize." The flight back to San Francisco was quiet, except for the sound of rotors and my own thoughts. Through the headset, David asked if I was okay, and I found myself smiling for the first time in days. "Better than okay," I told him. "I just remembered who I am." Over the next week, my phone rang constantly. Robert Mitchell called twice, wanting to discuss mutually beneficial business opportunities and strategic partnerships between our companies. Patricia left a carefully worded voicemail, apologizing for any misunderstandings about family dynamics and inviting me to lunch to discuss how we can better support each other. Jonathan sent an email asking for advice on healthcare technology investments, suddenly treating me like the expert I'd always been. His wife Melissa texted, asking if I'd be interested in joining the board of her favorite charity, apparently forgetting that she'd called me unsuitable for their social circle just days earlier. The extended family members who had witnessed my helicopter landing were clearly spreading the story throughout their social circles. Caroline fielded calls from reporters wanting to do features on Silicon Valley's secret millionaire, and speaking requests from conferences about women in technology and entrepreneurship. But the call I was waiting for came exactly 1 week later. Madison, Ryan's voice was different somehow, clearer, more confident than it had been in months. "Can we talk?" We met at the same hiking trail in the Santa Cruz Mountains, where we'd had our first date. The irony wasn't lost on me, returning to where everything had started, but as completely different people than we'd been 2 years earlier. He looked like he hadn't slept much, but there was something settled about him that I hadn't seen before. The nervous energy and constant tension that had characterized his behavior for months was gone, replaced by a calm determination. "I had several long conversations with my family," he began, as we started up the familiar trail. "Actually, that's an understatement. We had some of the most honest discussions we've ever had, and some of them weren't pleasant." "And?" "I told them that my relationship with you is not negotiable, regardless of your financial situation or theirs. That if they want me in their lives going forward, they need to treat you with respect. Not because you have money, but because you're the woman I love and plan to spend my life with." How did they take that? He laughed. But there wasn't much humor in it. Dad was actually the most reasonable, which surprised me. His business brain kicked in immediately, and he started seeing you as a valuable ally rather than a threat to family status. He's genuinely impressed with what you've built. And your mother? Mom is struggling more. She's built her entire identity around social hierarchy and family prestige, and having her assumptions challenge this dramatically is forcing her to reconsider some fundamental beliefs about worth and character. What about Jonathan? Jonathan is dealing with some serious ego bruising. Finding out that his little brother's girlfriend is more successful than he is hit him harder than I expected. But he'll come around when he realizes that fighting me means fighting Dad. And Dad is very interested in potentially working with Metacore AI. We walked in silence for a while, following the familiar trail through redwood groves that had witnessed the beginning of our relationship. The morning fog was just beginning to lift, creating ethereal beams of sunlight through the ancient trees. "I also made some other changes," Ryan continued. "I've decided to leave Mitchell Enterprises." That stopped me in my tracks. "What?" "I'm starting my own consulting firm focused on ethical AI implementation. It's something I've been thinking about for years, but I was always too scared to disappoint my parents or give up the security of the family business." "Ryan, that's a huge decision. Are you sure you're not just reacting to everything that's happened?" "I'm sure," he said, meeting my eyes with more certainty than I'd seen from him in our entire relationship. "Watching you build Metacore AI from nothing, seeing how passionate you are about your work, it made me realize I've been coasting on family connections instead of building something meaningful of my own." We resumed walking, the trail winding higher into the mountains where the view opened up to reveal the entire Bay Area spread below us. "I also talked to a therapist," Ryan continued, "about family dynamics, about why I've spent my whole life trying to please people who love me conditionally, about what it means to be in a real partnership with someone." That surprised me more than his career change. The Ryan I'd known had never been particularly introspective about psychological dynamics. What did you learn? That I've spent 29 years trying to earn approval from people who would always find new conditions to impose, and I almost lost the one person who loved me unconditionally for who I actually am. He stopped walking and turned to face me. Madison, I know I hurt you. I know I failed you when you needed me most. But I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I can be the partner you deserve. What does that look like? I asked. It means making decisions together as equals. It means defending our relationship even when it's uncomfortable or costly. It means building a life that's ours, not an extension of my family's expectations or social requirements. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a ring box, not the ornate vintage style I'd been expecting based on family traditions, but something clean and modern that he'd clearly chosen himself. This isn't my grandmother's ring, he said, opening the box to reveal a beautiful solitaire that caught the morning light filtering through the redwood canopy. It's not a family heirloom or a symbol of joining the Mitchell dynasty. It's just a promise from me to you that I choose us every day, regardless of what anyone else thinks. The ring was perfect, elegant but not ostentatious, valuable but not flashy, exactly what I would have chosen for myself. Ryan, you don't have to answer now, he said quickly. I know I have to earn back your trust, and that's going to take time, but I wanted you to know that I've made my choice. You're my choice. Not because my family approves now that they know your net worth, but because you're brilliant and strong, and you make me want to be better than I am. I looked at the ring, then at the man holding it. The man who had let his family call me trailer trash, but who had also spent the past week completely restructuring his life to become someone worthy of my trust. Ask me again in 6 months, I said finally. Show me what our life looks like when you're truly independent from your family's influence. Show me what it means to be partners when the stakes are high and the choices are difficult. He nodded, closing the ring box with careful precision. I'll wait as long as you need. 6 months later, I was looking at a fundamentally different relationship dynamic. Ryan had kept every promise he'd made on that hiking trail. When Patricia made a condescending comment about my unconventional background at a charity gala, Ryan immediately called her out in front of the entire table. When Robert tried to pressure me into selling Medicore AI to chip tech at below market value, Ryan not only supported my decision to decline, but helped me negotiate a better partnership deal with a competing firm. Most importantly, Ryan had successfully launched his ethical AI consulting firm. It was smaller and less prestigious than being a Mitchell Enterprises executive, but it was entirely his. We were building something together as true equals, both professionally and personally, without the shadow of family expectations or inherited advantages. The family events I now attended were different in subtle but significant ways. Patricia still wasn't warm, I doubted she ever would be, but she was consistently respectful. She'd learned to introduce me as Ryan's fiancé, the founder of Medicore AI, rather than Ryan's little girlfriend from Oregon. Robert actually sought out my opinion on technology investments and had become genuinely interested in healthcare innovation. Our conversations had evolved from condescending lectures about real business to substantive discussions about market trends and regulatory challenges. Jonathan remained somewhat resentful about being overshadowed by his younger brother's girlfriend, but he'd learned to hide it better after I'd helped his struggling startup secure funding through my investor network. Nothing changes attitudes like financial necessity. The extended family who had witnessed my helicopter landing now treated me like Silicon Valley royalty. It was amusing and slightly depressing how quickly money could change people's perceptions, but it was useful leverage for the causes I cared about. Medicore AI had grown to a $60 million valuation, with diagnostic software now being used in hospitals across 6 states. More importantly, we'd launched a nonprofit initiative to bring advanced diagnostic tools to rural and underserved communities. Exactly the kind of work that had drawn me to healthcare technology in the first place. I'd also started mentoring young women entrepreneurs, sharing my story at conferences, and investing in female-founded startups. The helicopter landing story had become something of a legend in Silicon Valley circles, but I tried to focus on the deeper lessons about self-worth and authenticity, rather than just the dramatic gesture. When Ryan asked me to marry him again, this time at our apartment, with no family pressure or external expectations, I said yes without hesitation. Not because his family finally approved of me, but because he'd proven he could be the partner I needed when circumstances became challenging. Our wedding was intimate and meaningful, held at a vineyard in Sonoma with just our closest friends and immediate family. Patricia gave a gracious speech about welcoming me to the family, though we both understood it was really about welcoming my business connections and financial contributions. Robert offered a toast about brilliant young entrepreneurs joining forces that felt genuine, if somewhat belated in its recognition. But the moment that mattered most to me was when Ryan's elderly Uncle William, the family patriarch who rarely spoke at gatherings, pulled me aside during the reception. "You know," he said quietly, his weathered hands steady on his champagne glass, "you reminded this family of something we'd forgotten. That respect has to be earned both ways, and money without character is just expensive emptiness. Thank you for that lesson." Looking back on this entire experience, I've learned some important lessons that I want to share with everyone watching this video. First, never let anyone make you feel small because of their assumptions about your background, your bank account, or your worth as a human being. The Mitchell family's initial rejection of me had nothing to do with my actual qualifications or character. It was entirely about their prejudices and social insecurities. Second, financial independence isn't just about having money in the bank. It's about having the freedom to make choices based on your values, rather than your fears. If I hadn't had the security of my own success and resources, I might have accepted their treatment just to maintain my relationship with Ryan. Third, authenticity in relationships is absolutely non-negotiable. I spent 2 years hiding my financial situation because I wanted to be loved for myself. But hiding significant parts of yourself creates its own problems and misunderstandings. True partnership requires being completely honest about who you are. Fourth, sometimes the people we love need to see us stand up for ourselves before they can learn to stand up for us. Ryan didn't find his backbone until he saw me refuse to be diminished by his family's expectations. And finally, the most dramatic gesture isn't always about revenge. Sometimes it's about forcing people to see you clearly for the first time in their lives. I still have that helicopter, by the way. These days, I use it mostly for business trips to our medical facilities in rural California, and for getting to investor meetings when commercial flights don't align with my schedule. But every now and then, when someone needs a reminder about judging books by their covers, David and I take a little flight to make a point. The Mitchell family learned that wealth and status don't automatically confer wisdom or character. Ryan learned to choose love over comfort and authenticity over approval. And I learned that standing up for yourself doesn't make you the villain in someone else's story. It makes you the hero of your own. Money isn't everything, but financial independence gives you choices that poverty never can. And it's deeply satisfying to watch people's attitudes change when they realize they've completely underestimated you. The look on the Mitchell family's faces when that helicopter landed. Absolutely priceless. But the real victory wasn't in proving my worth to people who should have seen it from the beginning. The real victory was in refusing to accept less than I deserved and finding someone who could grow into the partner I needed. So here's my challenge to everyone watching this. Know your worth and demand it. Don't let anyone convince you that you should be grateful for scraps when you deserve respect and recognition. If someone can't love and appreciate you when they think you have nothing, they don't deserve you when you have everything. Have you ever had to stand up to people who underestimated you because of assumptions about your background or resources? Share your stories in the comments below. I read every single one, and I love hearing how people find their strength in difficult situations. If this story inspired you to value yourself more highly, or reminded you that your worth isn't determined by other people's opinions, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about people who refuse to let others define their value. Remember, sometimes the best revenge is simply being exactly who you are, unapologetically and completely. The helicopter landing was just the delivery method for a message about respect, authenticity, and the courage to demand what you're worth. Thanks for joining me on this journey, and remember, never let anyone make you smaller than you are. You're worth more than their assumptions, and you deserve more than their conditional approval. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a company to run, a world to change, and a husband who's finally learned that love means choosing your partner over everyone else's expectations. But first, I think David and I are going to take the helicopter out for a sunset flight over the Bay Area. Some habits are definitely worth keeping.